The neon sign of Maggie's roadside diner flickered in the desert twilight, buzzing faintly against the hum of the highway. It was an old place, built back in the 1950s, with checkered floors, red leather booths, and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Business had slowed in recent times. Truckers had new rest stops, families preferred chain restaurants, and the diner mostly scraped by on-regulars and the occasional wanderer. Maggie herself was 52, a widow with laugh lines that spoke of hard years and tired eyes that told even more. She had run the diner alone since her husband's passing, working sunup to sundown, keeping the place alive not just for herself but for the memory of the man who had built it. That night, the diner was unusually quiet. Only 2 truckers sat at the counter, sipping their coffee and flipping through newspapers. A young couple shared a milkshake in the corner booth, whispering softly. Maggie wiped down tables with a rag, her mind on the stack of unpaid bills tucked under the cash register. The bell over the door jingled. Everyone looked up. In walked a man who made the room stiffen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a weathered leather jacket with a patch that read Hell's Angels, California. His boots clomped against the linoleum floor as he walked, each step heavy and deliberate. Tattoos snaked up his arms and neck, and a faded scar split his eyebrow. The couple in the corner went quiet. One of the truckers lowered his paper, eyeing the stranger cautiously. Maggie, however, had seen his kind before. She had learned not to judge people too quickly. "Evening," she said, forcing a warm smile. "Take any booth you like." The man gave a short nod and slid into the booth nearest the window. He didn't pull out a phone or look around like most folks did, he just sat, staring out at the highway like it carried ghosts. Maggie walked over with her notepad. "What'll it be, hun?" "Coffee," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "Black, that all?" she asked, raising a brow. "For now," he replied. She didn't push. Plenty of folks came in with little more than enough for a cup of coffee. Sometimes, coffee was all they needed, warmth, a seat, a little dignity. She poured his mug full and left the pot on his table. He wrapped his large, tattooed hands around the cup, holding it like it was the first warm thing he'd touched in days. The diner settled again. The jukebox hummed faintly in the background, the truckers resumed their quiet chatter, and the couple giggled over their milkshake. Maggie returned to her cleaning, sneaking glances at the stranger. 10 minutes later, the calm shattered. The bell jingled again, and in came 2 state troopers, their boots loud, their hands already hovering near their belts. Their eyes locked on the biker instantly. "You," one of them barked, pointing. "On your feet." The man didn't move. He simply took another sip of his coffee. "Ain't botherin' nobody," he said flatly. "Don't play games," the second trooper snapped. "You're loitering. Let's go." The young couple in the booth stiffened, glancing nervously at each other. One of the truckers set his paper down entirely, leaning forward as if expecting a fight. The biker set his mug down gently, then raised his hands. "Not lookin' for trouble. Just wanted coffee." The first trooper wasn't interested in explanations. He strode over, grabbed the man by the collar, and yanked him halfway out of the booth. The mug tipped, spilling coffee across the table. That was when Maggie felt something inside her snap. She had seen unfairness before. She had seen people bullied, pushed around, judged without cause. But she had never been able to stand by when it happened under her roof. "Hey," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the diner. Everyone froze. The trooper turned to her, annoyed. "Ma'am, stay out of this. We're handling it." "The only thing you're handling," Maggie shot back, "is a man who paid for his coffee and hasn't caused a lick of trouble. This is my diner. And in here, people get treated with respect." The trooper's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" "Doesn't matter who he is," Maggie said firmly, stepping closer. "Right now, he's my customer. And unless you have an actual charge against him, you've got no right to drag him out like some criminal." The room was silent except for the buzzing neon. The couple held hands tightly under the table. The truckers exchanged glances. The biker looked at Maggie, his brow furrowed in disbelief. Nobody defended men like him. People crossed the street when they saw his cut, clutched their purses, locked their car doors. Yet here was this middle-aged diner owner, standing toe-to-toe with armed officers on his behalf. The first trooper clenched his jaw. "Ma'am, we're warning you." "No," Maggie interrupted, her voice like steel. "I'm warning you. If you want to arrest this man, you'd better do it the right way. With a charge. Otherwise, let him finish his coffee. The second trooper muttered something under his breath. The tension stretched, thick as fog. Finally, the first officer released the biker's collar, shoving him back into the booth. Fine, he growled. But don't say we didn't warn you. People like him. Always trouble. They turned and stormed out, the bell above the door jingling angrily in their wake. Silence filled the diner. All eyes turned to Maggie. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart pounding, and looked back at the biker. You okay? She asked softly. He nodded slowly. Name's Cole, he said, his voice low but steady. Didn't expect that. Maggie smiled faintly. Coffee's still hot. Better drink it before it gets cold. For the first time, Cole cracked a small smile. Not the kind of smile that said everything's fine, but the kind that said thank you. He lifted the mug again, taking a sip, as though it meant more now than it had before. The truckers went back to their papers, the couple let out a relieved laugh, and the diner returned to its quiet hum. But the air had changed. Something had shifted. Maggie returned to the counter, her hands still trembling. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she'd just made a friend or an enemy. All she knew was this: she had stood up for what was right, and in that moment, it had mattered. The next morning dawned clear and golden, the desert sun rising over the horizon like a spotlight on Route 66. Maggie unlocked the diner doors at 7 a.m., yawning as she flipped the "Open" sign around. She brewed fresh coffee, straightened napkin holders, and prepared for another day of scraping by. She thought briefly of the biker from last night, Cole. She hadn't expected to see him again. Men like him drifted in and out like tumbleweeds. What mattered to her wasn't whether he returned, it was that, for once, she hadn't stayed silent. She had stood her ground. By mid-morning, business was slow. A few regulars stopped in: Hank, the retired mechanic who always ordered pancakes, and Lucy, a schoolteacher who came for tea before work. Maggie served them with her usual cheer, though fatigue weighed on her shoulders. Then the ground began to tremble. At first, she thought it was an approaching storm. The plates rattled on the shelves, the coffee in cups rippled. Then came the unmistakable roar, deep, guttural, and unrelenting. Motorcycle engines. Maggie froze. Outside, dust clouds rose over the highway. One by one, bikes appeared on the horizon. First 10, then 20, then an entire column of chrome and steel, the sun flashing off polished handlebars and black leather vests. The sound grew louder until the diner walls seemed to vibrate. Hank peered out the window, wide-eyed. Good Lord, he muttered. Looks like the whole Hell's Angels chapter. Lucy clutched her teacup nervously. Maggie, what did you do? Maggie's heart pounded. For a split second, doubt flooded her. Had she made a mistake defending Cole? Was this the reckoning, trouble rolling into her parking lot? Within minutes, the diner's tiny gravel lot was overflowing. Motorcycles lined the highway shoulder in both directions, engines rumbling like a thunderstorm. There had to be nearly 200 bikers. Their leather jackets bore the same emblem, the skull-wing patch of the Hells Angels. The door opened, and in stepped Cole. The diner went silent. Every eye turned as he pulled off his helmet, revealing the same scarred brow and steady gaze from the night before. This time, though, he wasn't alone. Behind him came men and women of all sizes and ages, each wearing the same patch, each carrying the same air of fierce loyalty. Cole's boots echoed on the floor as he stopped in the middle of the diner. He looked straight at Maggie. This here's Maggie, he announced, his voice booming. Last night, 2 cops tried to drag me out of this place for nothing more than ordering coffee. She stood up for me. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She treated me like a man when others just see a patch. The bikers outside erupted in cheers, their voices carrying through the open windows. Some revved their engines in unison, the sound like applause in steel and gasoline. Maggie stood frozen, her dish towel still in hand. Cole, she said softly, I only did what anyone should. But Cole shook his head. No, ma'am, most folks don't. Most folks cross the street. Most folks point fingers. You didn't. You saw a man, not a label. And when someone does that for one of us, he glanced over his shoulder at the sea of bikers outside. They do it for all of us. The next few hours felt surreal. Bikers filled every booth, every stool at the counter. They ordered stacks of pancakes, burgers, and endless pots of coffee. They laughed, swapped stories, and treated Maggie's little diner like home. One man pulled out his wallet and tipped $100 bill on a $5 meal. Another brought in a box of fresh flowers, setting them on the counter with a grin. Outside, bikers cleaned up the lot, sweeping gravel, fixing Maggie's broken neon sign, even repainting the chipped white fence around her property. A few of them ran to nearby towns, returning with supplies for repairs. It was as if the entire chapter had adopted her diner. Lucy, the schoolteacher, whispered in awe, "They're helping." Hank chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be damned." By mid-afternoon, Maggie's cash register was stuffed with more money than she'd seen in months. Her freezer was nearly empty, every last burger patty and slice of pie sold out. But more than the sales, what touched her most was the atmosphere. Rough-looking bikers with hardened faces held the door open for elderly customers. Tattooed men offered lollipops to children who peered curiously from the sidewalk. Someone fixed the jukebox for free, and soon rock and roll poured through the diner, bringing laughter and life back into the dusty old place. Finally, as the sun began to set, Cole returned to the counter where Maggie stood, exhausted but glowing. "You kept your word," he said. "You let me finish my coffee. Today, we made sure you'll never have to worry about empty booths again." He slid a thick envelope across the counter. "For repairs, for bills, for whatever you need." Maggie pushed it back gently. "Cole, this is too much." He shook his head. "Respect ain't free. You earned ours. This is just how we say thank you." For a long moment, Maggie's eyes misted. She wasn't used to kindness, not like this, not so loud, not so overwhelming. She nodded, her voice catching. "Well, then you all come back soon. Coffee's always hot." Cole smiled faintly. "Count on it." The bikers filed out one by one, their engines roaring to life, filling the evening air with thunder once more. As they rode off into the horizon, Maggie stood at the doorway of her diner, watching the dust settle, her heart full. The diner felt different now, like it had been baptized in loyalty, rebuilt not just in wood and paint but in trust. That night, as Maggie counted the day's earnings and tucked them safely away, she realized something profound. Courage costs you something in the moment: fear, risk, standing alone. But it pays back in ways you never expect. And sometimes, when you defend just one person, 200 more will rise to defend you. Moral: true courage inspires loyalty. When you choose to see the humanity in others instead of their labels, you may find yourself richer, not just in money, but in respect, community, and friendship.